Emulation consists in imitating a thing, trying to equal or even improve it. Playing means doing something for fun and entertainment. Under these premises, this paper proposes to describe an emulation game that addresses an approach to the area of computational neuroscience. It is in this context where we are designing, performing and valuing certain technical devices that could reveal, or make effective, computational events associated with the emergence of consciousness. The conceptual framework, in which is situated our game, can be defined as a possible epistemogony, a space where the physiology of knowledge and the making are activated, and from which we intend to highlight certain conditions that make possible both the so-called scientific research, and art making. The initial approach to this issue undertook a challenge to design an analogical electronic neuron, that is, to achieve a functional circuit with the materials and knowledge we have within our reach. After several unsatisfactory versions, and a continuous tinkering process, we found a possible configuration, following in the tradition of the earliest cybernetic systems. With the sufficient number of neurons, along with the ability to manufacture them economically, we began to investigate the effects of their connectivity. Thus, neural activity monitored and emulated in the processing environment has led to some empirical certainties. These basic agonistic-antagonistic effects described can give us an idea of the immense complexity inherent in the ideation of a neuronal connectivity grammar that aspires to emulate complex behaviors without the aid of symbolic computation. However, that seems to be how life works, thanks to the help of huge amounts of time, and perhaps something else. For example, the following arrangements could be used to manage a bipedal locomotive system that would be able to modify its speed, its bilateral symmetry and remember stimuli in order to alter its behavior. Here, two neurons that are in a state of metastable equilibrium are stimulated by the triggering of a third neuron. This trigger causes a break in metastability, and the two neurons initiate an oscillation cycle of a duration determined by the intensity of their synaptic connections. For example, this oscillation could be used to temporarily stimulate or inhibit the functioning of another neuronal device. In an attempt to reconcile biologically inspired reactivities with binary symbolic computation, we can try to reproduce with our neurons the connective characteristics of the so-called logic gates. As shown in the following figures, in this sense, we have begun to approach to possible neural configurations that could reproduce the binary logic gates, with interesting results, but perhaps not completely comparable or equivalent, as one would expect. Logic function in. The graph shows the effect of two touch sensors connected to the exciter synapses of neuron 1 and neuron 2. The stimulation of only one of these is not enough to excite the response of neuron 3. Logic function or The graph shows two touch sensors connected to neurons 1 and 2. Either of them indistinctly excite neuron 3. Logic function not. The graph shows a tactile sensor that excites neuron 1 in turn connected to the inhibitory synapse of neuron 2. The resulting effect consists of a reflexive activation of neuron 2, at the moment when the signal from neuron 1 ceases. Logic function NOR. The graph shows the activation sequence of 4 neurons according to the NOR connective configuration. For example, this configuration could be related to a synchronized activation sequence of 4 motor extremities. Logic function NAND. In the case reproduced in the neurogram, neuron 1 and neuron 2 oscillate synchronously according to the NOT configuration. The result is an almost complete inhibition of neuron 5, similar to a fibrillation effect in a lifelike average. Logic function EXOR. The graph shows 5 neurons and 2 tactile sensors. Neuron 5 is an output dependent on simultaneous or alternating activation of the tactile inputs that excite neurons 1 and 3. Excitation of neuron 3 inhibits the triggering of neuron 5, until activation of the tactile sensor of neuron 1 reverses the inhibitory effect of neuron 3. A strictly structural reason for the difficult adaptation of these devices to the assumptions of formal logic would be that our neuron emulators, as biological neurons, do not exactly work by means of constant energy flows that can be channeled by opening or closing logic gates, but pulses and discrete loading and unloading times. However, since they are subject to great indeterminacy, they generate fields with a high degree of uncertainty. This is due to the analogical architecture itself, based on timed cycles of charge and discharge of capacitors through variable resistances dependent on light, which transduce luminous fluxes in electrical current. A basic structural condition must be also added to this, which is the use of bare optical fiber for the transmission of information. This last feature entails exposing the functioning of the system to the surrounding light environment that is making it permeable to the influence of both the photonic particles from the surrounding environment and the neighboring neuronal units. Therefore, the intrinsic activity of the system feeds back and generates internal filtrations and resonances and, simultaneously, is highly sensitive to variations in the environment. This apparent disadvantage is for us an interesting characteristic, because we believe that it brings it closer to the real functioning mode of biological nervous systems, which make it intertwined with their ecosystem as emulators and resonators. In this context, certain feedback phenomena coming from the electromagnetic fields generated by the neuronal activity itself, which perhaps have something to do with the emergence of what is called the mind, should not be discarded. It is possible that there are no logical gates in logical thought, although there are in artificial intelligence. The art installation consists in a mechanistic model that attempts to emulate the functioning of the nervous systems of biological entities, avoiding the use of computer models based on symbolic algorithms. On the contrary, it addresses the issue of emergence of consciousness from similarity, starting from functional units, analog electronic neurons, that are interconnected in order to create networks that are capable of generating their own reality, and feeding on it.